There are moments in your life when the silence feels heavier than noise, when your thoughts go deeper than the surface conversations around you, when you sit in a room full of people and still feel like you don't belong anywhere, and the world is quick to give that a label. They call it depression. They tell you something is wrong with you. They offer pills, distractions, and shallow explanations for a pain that feels far too ancient and far too meaningful to be reduced to a diagnosis. But Scripture tells a different story. There is a kind of sorrow that does not come from hopelessness, but from awareness. A grief that is not rooted in despair, but in revelation. When God opens your eyes, He does not only show you glory, He shows you truth, and truth is heavy. Truth makes you grieve what others celebrate. It makes you restless in systems that thrive on compromise. It makes you uncomfortable in a world that prefers darkness, because light exposes too much. Many of the people God used most powerfully in the Bible were accused of being unstable, extreme, or broken. Jeremiah wept until they called him the weeping prophet. Elijah collapsed under a tree, asking God to take his life. After one of the greatest victories of faith, David poured his anguish into psalms that sound like cries from the edge of despair. Even Jesus, the Son of God Himself, was described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, not because He lacked faith, but because He carried heaven's perspective in a fallen world. There is a difference between being crushed by life and being burdened by calling. When God places His word in you, it presses on your emotions. When He allows you to see what is coming, it isolates you from shallow joy. When He teaches you to feel what He feels, your heart becomes tender in a world that has learned to be numb. That does not mean you are weak. It does not mean you are broken. And it does not mean God has abandoned you. It may mean you are carrying something sacred that you have not yet learned how to name. This message is not here to deny real mental health struggles, and it is not here to glorify suffering. It is here to separate confusion from calling, despair from discernment, and hopelessness from holy burden. Because some of you have been fighting yourself, trying to escape what God is actually forming in you. If you felt this weight, this loneliness, this deep pull toward God even when your soul feels tired, then stay here. Not to be labeled, but to be understood. Not to be fixed, but to be awakened. Number 1. The burden of seeing what others can't see. There is a weight that comes with vision. Not the kind the world applauds, but the kind that quietly presses on your soul when you realize you don't see life the way others do anymore. You walk through the same streets, sit in the same rooms, scroll the same feeds, yet something inside you keeps noticing what others overlook. You sense decay where others see success. You feel urgency where others feel comfort. And that awareness doesn't make you feel powerful. It makes you feel heavy. This is where many people begin to think something is wrong with them. Because joy seems harder to access. Because laughter feels shallow. Because your spirit won't let you ignore what everyone else has learned to tolerate. But in Scripture, this kind of sight was never a curse. It was a calling. God does not give prophetic vision to entertain you. He gives it to burden you. He allows you to see the gap between heaven and earth, so that your heart will ache enough to pray, to warn, to intercede, and to stand when others bow. When you see clearly, you grieve deeply. You grieve for people destroying themselves while calling it freedom. You grieve for churches that have lost their fire. You grieve for truth being traded for applause. And that grief sits in your chest, misunderstood by a culture that only knows happiness when everything is easy. But this sorrow is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is the weight of carrying insight without yet knowing how God will use it. You are not depressed because you see too much. You are burdened because God trusted you with sight. And until you understand that, you will keep trying to escape what heaven is actually developing in you. Number 2, isolation. When God separates you before He uses you, there is a loneliness that hurts. And then there is a loneliness that shapes. The kind that doesn't come from rejection alone, but from separation. You didn't choose it. You didn't ask for it. It simply happened. Friendships faded. Conversations stopped feeding your soul. The things that once excited you no longer satisfy you, and suddenly you find yourself alone, more often than you ever planned to be. This is usually the moment people assume God has forgotten them. But Scripture reveals something uncomfortable and holy. God often pulls his messengers away before he sends them forward. Before he speaks through you, he speaks to you. Before he reveals you publicly, he refines you privately. And refinement requires space, silence, distance from noise that would drown out his voice. Isolation feels cruel when you don't understand its purpose. It feels like punishment when it's actually preparation. In solitude, God strips away borrowed identities. He breaks dependence on applause. He teaches you to hear him without confirmation from people. And yes, it can feel suffocating at times. It can feel like abandonment. But God does not isolate to destroy. He isolates to consecrate. Many prophets were alone long before they were heard. Not because they were unlovable, but because they were being set apart. The loneliness you feel may not be proof that something is wrong with you. It may be evidence that God is guarding what he placed inside you until the right moment. It may be evidence that God is guarding what he placed inside you until the right moment. And until that moment comes, the silence is not empty. It is sacred. Number 3. Deep emotional pain that comes from love, not despair. There is a pain that feels overwhelming, not because life has defeated you, but because your heart is alive. You don't hurt because you don't care. You hurt because you care more than most. You feel things at a depth that others avoid. You don't know how to watch people walk toward destruction and simply shrug your shoulders. You don't know how to ignore injustice, compromise, or spiritual emptiness and call it normal. And that sensitivity can feel like a curse in a world that rewards emotional numbness. But this kind of pain is not rooted in despair. It is rooted in love. Biblical prophets were not cold messengers delivering detached warnings. They were broken-hearted lovers of God and people. Jeremiah didn't just announce judgment. He wept over the very people who mocked him. Moses didn't just confront rebellion. He pleaded with God to spare those who wanted to stone him. Jesus didn't stand above suffering. He entered it, carrying the grief of humanity in his own body. When your heart breaks over what breaks God's heart, the world will try to convince you that something is emotionally wrong with you. They will tell you to toughen up, detach, or distract yourself. But God never asked his prophets to stop feeling. He taught them where to take their feelings. Pain becomes dangerous when it has nowhere to go. But when pain is poured out before God, it becomes intercession. It becomes prayer with tears. It becomes power. You are not drowning in emotion because you are unstable. You are carrying emotional weight because love has been entrusted to you. And until you learn to see that love as a strength, you will keep fighting the very thing that qualifies you to stand in the gap. Number 4. The constant inner fire. You can't turn off. There is something inside you that refuses to be quiet. Even when you're exhausted. Even when you try to pull back. Even when you tell yourself you're done caring, done thinking, done wrestling with God. You try to settle into comfort, but your spirit won't let you. You try to blend in, but something in you keeps pushing against the current. It's not anxiety. It's not restlessness without reason. It's a fire. The Scripture describes it perfectly, a fire shut up in the bones. The kind of inner burning that makes silence uncomfortable and disobedience unbearable. You may not always know what God is asking of you yet, but you know when you're running from it. That fire doesn't let you fully enjoy compromise. It doesn't allow you to stay numb for long. It keeps stirring questions, convictions, and holy discontent. This is why prophets struggle in lukewarm environments. Comfort feels like suffocation when you're carrying calling. Entertainment can't drown out purpose forever. And when you try to suppress that fire, it doesn't disappear, it turns inward. That's when frustration grows. That's when heaviness sets in. Not because the fire is wrong, but because it was never meant to be buried. God does not ignite people to torment them. He ignites them to illuminate. But before that fire is released outward, It burns inward, refining motives, burning pride, and strengthening obedience. The fire you feel is not a sign you're falling apart. It's evidence that God is still speaking, still calling, still shaping you, even when you don't yet see where He's leading. And until you understand that, you will keep mistaking holy fire for inner chaos. Number 5. Rejection and mislabeling by the people around you. There comes a point when you realize it's not just that people don't understand you. They've started defining you incorrectly. You're not just ignored, you're misinterpreted. Your sincerity is called intensity. Your discernment is labeled negativity. Your concern is dismissed as instability. And after hearing it long enough, you start wondering if they might be right. But this pattern is as old as Scripture itself. Prophets were rarely rejected because they were unclear. They were rejected because they were uncomfortable. Truth disrupts false peace. Light exposes what darkness depends on to survive. So instead of confronting the message, people attack the messenger. They minimize you, pathologize you, and reduce your calling to a personality flaw. This kind of rejection cuts deeply because you're not trying to be difficult. You're trying to be faithful. You're not looking for attention. You're trying to stay obedient to what God keeps placing on your heart. But when the people closest to you don't recognize what God is doing in you, it creates a unique kind of pain, one that feels personal, isolating, and exhausting. God never promised prophets applause. He promised His presence. Being mislabeled does not mean you missed God. It often means you touched something sacred that threatened what others were protecting. And if you're not careful, you'll start editing yourself to gain acceptance, slowly silencing the very voice God entrusted to you. Rejection is not always a sign to retreat. Sometimes it's confirmation that you're standing where truth still matters. Number 6. Heavy spiritual attacks during quiet or hidden seasons. There are seasons when nothing dramatic is happening on the outside, yet everything feels heavy on the inside. You're not actively sinning. You're not walking in open rebellion. You may even be doing your best to stay close to God. And still, fatigue sets in. Motivation drops. Your thoughts feel foggy. Your spirit feels weighed down for no obvious reason. This is where many people confuse spiritual attack with personal failure. But Scripture reveals that the enemy often targets prophets, not when they're loud, but when they're hidden, especially after moments of obedience or right before new assignments. Elijah didn't collapse during the confrontation on Mount Carmel. He collapsed afterward, alone, exhausted, and under attack. Spiritual warfare does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like heaviness, like discouragement without a clear source, like the urge to withdraw, to give up, to disappear. The enemy's strategy is simple. If he can't destroy your calling, he will try to wear you down emotionally until you abandon it yourself. But notice how God responded to Elijah, not with condemnation, not with rebuke. God responded with rest, nourishment, and a whisper, because God understood that Elijah wasn't faithless, he was depleted, and depletion can distort perception. If you've been feeling attacked in quiet seasons, it doesn't mean you're weak. It may mean you're dangerous to the enemy in ways you don't yet see. And God is not absent in these moments. He is closer than you realize, guarding what is forming in you while you regain strength. Sometimes the heaviest battles happen when no one else is watching. Number 7. A deep draw toward God even when you feel empty. There is something strange and sacred about this sign. On the surface, you feel drained. Your prayers don't always flow. Worship doesn't always feel electric. Your emotions rise and fall, and there are days when your soul feels dry and tired. And yet, despite all of that, you cannot walk away from God. You may question Him. You may wrestle with Him. You may sit in silence before Him with no words left. But you stay. That pull is not habit. It's not fear. And it's not religious routine. It's called. Prophetic people don't cling to God because it's easy. They cling because they know there is no life outside of Him. Even when they don't understand Him, they recognize His voice. Even when they feel weak, they know where strength comes from. David cried out from cave. Jeremiah spoke through tears. Jesus in his darkest hour still prayed. Father, emptiness did not drive them away. It drove them deeper. This is the difference between despair and refinement. Despair runs from God. Refinement wrestles with Him. If you were truly abandoned, you wouldn't be longing for Him at all. Hunger is proof of life. Thirst is evidence that God is still drawing you. So when you feel empty but still reaching, tired but still praying, wounded but still believing, understand this: God is not finished with you. He is deepening your roots so that when you stand, you will not be easily shaken. Conclusion. Some of you have spent years trying to fix what was never broken. You've prayed for the weight to lift, for the feelings to disappear, for your heart to become lighter like everyone else's. But God was never trying to make you lighter. He was making you deeper. He was shaping a vessel that could carry truth without corruption, compassion without compromise, and fire without burning out. This does not mean every struggle is spiritual, and it does not mean you should ignore wisdom, counsel, or help when you need it. God uses doctors, therapists, rest, and community, but it does mean that not every heaviness is pathology. Some heaviness is purpose, some sorrow is sacred, some loneliness is preparation. If you saw yourself in these signs, don't rush to label yourself as broken. Ask instead what God may be revealing to you. Ask what He is forming in the quiet. Ask how He wants to use what you've been trying to escape. You are not overlooked. You are not abandoned. And you are not losing your mind. You are being shaped. And when the time comes, when the fire finds its voice, when the burden becomes clarity, when the isolation turns into authority, you will look back on these seasons and realize they were not meant to destroy you. They were meant to prepare you to speak.